Kaelen Vance didn't believe in destiny, but he did believe in the impossible. As a lead xenobiologist on the drifting research station Aethelgard, he spent his days staring into the glowing teal depths of bioluminescent flora from the Xylos Nebula. It was a world of cold logic, hard data, and the silent humming of life support systems. But everything changed the moment he met Seryth. She wasn't human. She was Valari, a species with skin like starlight and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of a dying sun. Most humans found the Valari intimidating, even cold. But Kaelen? He found them breathtaking. Specifically, he found Seryth breathtaking. They had been working together for 6 months, decoding the genetic markers of the glass leaf plants that thrived in the lethal radiation of the binary star system. To Kaelen, the plants were a puzzle. To Seryth, they were a song. She moved through the lab with a grace that defied gravity, her voice carrying a soft melodic resonance that made the hair on Kaelen's arms stand up. It wasn't just professional respect anymore. It was something deeper, something dangerous. Today, the readout on Kaelen's terminal was screaming. The protein synthesis shouldn't have been possible. The plants were pulling carbon out of thin air and turning it into something that looked suspiciously like a neural network. He leaned in closer, his brow furrowed in deep concentration, his mind racing through 1,000 different theories. He was so lost in the data that he didn't hear the pneumatic hiss of the lab door. He didn't hear the soft rhythmic tapping of crystalline boots on the metallic floor. "You're doing it again, Kaelen," a voice whispered, vibrating in the very air around him. It was Seryth. He turned, and for a second, he forgot how to breathe. She was standing there, the ambient blue light of the lab reflecting off her iridescent collarbones. Her eyes, vast and amber, were fixed on him with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. "That look," she continued, her lips curving into a ghost of a smile. "The one where you try to conquer the universe with your mind, because your heart is too afraid to ask the question." Kaelen felt his face flush. He was a man of science, a man of words, yet around her, he felt like a cadet on his first voyage. He tried to play it off, reaching for the easy humor that humans used as a shield. "Just trying to make sure these plants don't start a revolution, Seryth," he joked, his voice slightly higher than usual. "Besides, someone has to keep this station from floating away into the void. Hold on before we get into the real stuff I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments." Seryth stepped closer. The scent of ozone and crushed jasmine followed her. She reached out, her long, elegant fingers hovering just inches from the terminal. "The Valari do not believe in coincidences," she said softly. "We believe in resonance. And right now, the resonance between us is deafening." Kaelen's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a plasma torch. He looked from the screen to her, his pulse racing. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would bridge the light years between their cultures. But instead, his mind went to a joke he'd heard in the mess hall earlier that day. A joke about the absurdity of interspecies politics and the upcoming Union Day festival. "You know," Kaelen said, his voice dropping to a low, playful tone, "the guys in the canteen are betting that the next diplomatic merger will be a marriage. I told them I'd probably say yes if a beautiful alien woman proposed to me, just for the sake of intergalactic peace." He laughed, expecting her to join in, expecting the tension to break. But Seryth didn't laugh. She didn't move. She simply stared at him, her amber eyes turning a deep, swirling gold. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. Then she leaned in, her lips brushing against the shell of his ear, her breath warm and smelling of starlight. "Then say yes," she whispered. Kaelen froze. The air in his lungs turned to ice. She wasn't joking. The silence that followed Seryth's whisper was louder than any klaxon on the Aethelgard. Kaelen felt the world tilt. He had spent years studying the Valari, learning their syntax, their biological markers, and their stoic diplomatic protocols. Never once had he read about them having a sense of humor, this sharp or a gaze this predatory. He searched her face for a flicker of a joke, a hint of the gotcha moment that usually followed a human prank. But Seryth remained as still as a statue carved from moonstone. Her hand, cool and smooth, slid across the console and rested over his. The thermal sensors on his suit flared, registering the slight temperature difference between their species. To a Valari, a touch wasn't just physical. It was an exchange of intent. Kaelen's mind raced. Was this a cultural misunderstanding? Was saying yes a Valari idiom for agreeing to a research paper? Or was the most beautiful woman in the quadrant actually calling his bluff? Seryth, he stammered, his scientific brain struggling to reboot. I was just making a joke. You know how humans are. We use humor to deal with stress or when we're, he trailed off, unable to find the word for the electricity crackling between them. When you are afraid of what you desire. Seryth finished for him. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she leaned in closer, the bioluminescent glow of the plants casting long dancing shadows across her sharp features. Human humor is a fascinating defense mechanism, Kaelen. But the Valari do not joke about the union of souls. To us, words are the blueprint of reality. You spoke the condition. I provided the response. Kaelen swallowed hard. The air in the lab felt thin, as if the life support had suddenly cut out. He looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused from years of field work. Hers, elegant and shimmering with a faint, natural phosphorescence. The contrast was a perfect metaphor for their two worlds. Humanity was the grit, the chaos, the unexpected variable. The Valari were the harmony, the ancient light. I'm a technician, Seryth, he whispered, finally meeting her eyes. A narrator of old bones and dead plants. You're a high canter of the research cast. Your people don't just propose to someone like me. My people value strength, Kaelen, she countered, her voice dropping into a rhythmic hum that vibrated in his chest. Not the strength of muscle, but the strength of the spirit that dares to look into the dark and see a garden. I have watched you for 8 months. I have seen you risk your life to save a single seedling during the solar flare. I have heard you speak to the stars as if they were your kin. She stepped even closer, forcing him to lean back against the cold metal of the gene sequencer. The scent of her, that intoxicating mix of ozone and ancient forests, clouded his judgment. For a moment, the mission, the station, and the protocols of the United Earth Command faded into nothingness. There was only the gold in her eyes and the weight of her hand on his. You said you would say yes, she reminded him, her voice a velvety challenge. Are humans so fickle that their word lasts only as long as a breath? Kaelen felt a surge of defiance, that classic human spark that hated being told what it couldn't do. He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized he wasn't afraid of the alien. He was afraid of the feeling. He was afraid that if he stepped across this line, there was no going back to his quiet, lonely life among the stars. I'm not fickle, Kaelen said, his voice regaining its strength. But this isn't a research project, Seryth. This is life. If I say yes, it's not for a joke. It's not for a diplomatic merger. It's because I don't want to spend another night on this station, staring at a screen, instead of you. Seryth's eyes widened, the gold deepening into a rich, burnt orange, the Valari sign of intense emotion. She let out a breath that sounded like a sigh of relief. Then the resonance is true, she whispered. But before Kaelen could respond, the lab's primary lights flickered and died. A deep, guttural thud shook the entire deck, throwing them both toward the floor. Red emergency strobes began to pulse, and the station's I voice, usually calm and melodic, turned harsh and metallic. Warning, hull integrity compromised. External breach detected in Sector 4. All personnel evacuate to escape pods immediately. Kaelen grabbed Seryth's arm, pulling her up. The romantic tension was instantly replaced by the cold, hard adrenaline of survival. Sector 4? He gasped. That's the life support hub. If that goes, the whole station decompresses in minutes. He looked at the door, then back at the console where months of their work was still uploading to the central core. If they left now, the data was lost. If they stayed, they were dead. But as he turned to Seryth, he saw her looking not at the door, but at the shadows moving in the corridor outside. Shadows that shouldn't have been there. "Kaelen," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "That wasn't an accident. They're here." The red emergency lights bathed the lab in a rhythmic, bloody pulse. Kaelen's heart was no longer racing from romance. It was thundering with the raw instinct of a man who had survived 3 frontier expeditions. He didn't ask who they were. In the deep reaches of the Xylos Nebula, there were only a few things capable of breaching a shielded research station, and none of them came in peace. "The Krell," Kaelen whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. The Krell were the scavengers of the void, a swarm mind species that saw technology as prey and organic life as a nuisance to be cleared. If they had bypassed the Aethelgard's external sensors, it meant they weren't just looking for scrap. They were looking for the Valari research. They were looking for Seryth. "They want the neural sequence," Seryth said, her voice regaining its melodic steel even as her skin paled to a ghostly silver. She pointed at the gene sequencer, which was still frantically blinking at 88%. "If they harvest the glass leaf data, they can weaponize the radiation-resistant proteins. They could invade binary systems that were once thought to be natural fortresses." Kaelen looked at the door. Through the reinforced glass, he saw a shadow move, a spindly, multi-jointed silhouette that hissed with the sound of escaping steam. The lockout seals were holding, but for how long? The Krell didn't use keys. They used acid and sheer numbers. "How long until the upload finishes?" Kaelen asked, his hands flying over the keyboard, rerouting emergency power from the lab's climate control to the transmitter. 4 minutes, Seryth replied. "But we do not have 4 minutes. The hull breach in Sector 4 means the atmospheric pressure is dropping. The structural integrity of this wing is failing." Kaelen looked at her, and then at the small, obsidian-cased drive plugged into the side of the console. It was his personal backup. If he pulled it now, the data would be corrupted. But if he waited, they'd both be breathing vacuum. This was the HFY spirit, the stubborn, irrational refusal to accept a losing hand. Humans were famous for it. They were the species that ran into burning buildings to save a pet, the ones who spent decades terraforming rocks just to prove they could. "Seryth, get behind the cooling vats," Kaelen commanded, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of pure authority. "What are you doing?" she asked, her amber eyes wide with a mix of confusion and awe. "I'm a human," Kaelen said, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as he grabbed a heavy-duty plasma cutter from the tool rack. "We're really good at 2 things, fixing things that are broken and breaking things that think they're invincible. I'm going to buy us those 4 minutes." A screeching sound tore through the air as the lab door began to groan. A searing yellow liquid began to bubble through the seam's Krell digestive acid. The metal was weeping, melting away to reveal the horrors on the other side. Kaelen braced his boots against a lab table and leveled the plasma cutter at the center of the door. "Kaelen, you cannot fight a swarm." Seryth cried out, reaching for him. "I don't have to fight the whole swarm," Kaelen grunted as the first Krell limb a jagged, chitinous spear burst through the melting door. "I just have to make them regret choosing this room." With a roar of defiance, Kaelen squeezed the trigger. A beam of white-hot ionized gas erupted from the cutter, slamming into the breach. The Krell on the other side shrieked, a sound like grinding glass as the heat cooked its exoskeleton instantly. But more were coming. He could hear them clicking in the vents, scuttling over the ceiling. 92%. Seryth shouted over the hiss of the cutter and the thundering of the station's alarms. Suddenly, the ceiling panel above Seryth buckled. A Krell scout, smaller and faster than the soldiers at the door, dropped down like a nightmare spider. Its eyes, dozens of black beads, locked onto Seryth. Kaelen swung the cutter, but he was too far. The creature lunged, its mandibles wide, "No!" Kaelen screamed. But Seryth didn't cower. She raised her hand, and for a split second, the air around her shimmered with a violet light. The scout froze mid-air, its body vibrating as if hit by a high-frequency wave. "I am Valari," she said, her voice resonating with a power Kaelen had never heard. "We are the harmony of the stars, and you are out of tune." The scout exploded into a cloud of dust, but the effort drained Seryth. She slumped against the vats, her glow fading to a dull gray. Kaelen realized then that she had used her own life force to protect the data. The door finally gave way with a deafening crash, and 3 massive Krell soldiers spilled into the room, their eyes glowing with a hungry, predatory light. Kaelen stood his ground, his cutter humming low, his heart beating for the woman behind him. He had joked about saying yes to a proposal. Now he realized he'd say yes to 1,000 deaths if it meant she lived. The first Krell soldier lunged, its multi-jointed legs clicking against the metal floor with terrifying speed. Kaelen didn't have the luxury of a pulse rifle or a thermal shield. He had a glorified welding torch and the stubbornness of a species that had tamed a hostile Earth. He stepped into the creature's guard, swinging the plasma cutter in a wide, searing arc. The white-hot beam sliced through the Krell's primary sensory stalk, sending a spray of foul-smelling yellow ichor across the lab. The creature shrieked, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly into the skull. But Kaelen didn't stop. He kicked a heavy, rolling diagnostic cart into the path of the second soldier, momentarily tripping the beast as it tried to scramble over the equipment. 96%. Seryth's voice was a ragged whisper. She was pale, her iridescent skin flickering like a dying candle. The effort of the sonic blast had taken a toll on her Valari physiology, which was tuned for harmony, not the brutal discord of a boarding party. "Almost there, Seryth. Just hold on." Kaelen roared, his muscles burning. He ducked under a scything claw that whistled inches above his head, the tip of the blade leaving a deep gouge in the reinforced carbon fiber wall. The third Krell, larger than the others and armored in a thick, matte black carapace, didn't rush. It watched. It learned. It saw Kaelen's pattern, the way he protected his left side, the way his eyes constantly darted back to the woman slumped against the vats. It was a commander, a tactician of the swarm. It hissed a command, and the wounded soldiers began to circle, cutting off Kaelen's path to the escape pods. Kaelen felt the cold sweat stinging his eyes. He was outmatched, and he knew it. This was the moment in every sci-fi holovid where the hero finds a secret weapon or a hidden reserve of strength. But Kaelen Vance was just a man. He was tired, he was bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, and he was terrified. Then he looked at Seryth. She was looking back at him, not with the pity of a superior being, but with a profound, aching pride. In that moment, Kaelen realized that being human wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about being the only ones crazy enough to believe that a joke could become a promise, and a promise could become a reason to die. "Seryth," Kaelen said, his voice dropping to a calm, steady resonance that seemed to cut through the chaos. "When that bar hits 100, you grab the drive and you run. Do you hear me? You don't look back." "Kaelen, no," she protested, her fingers trembling as they reached for him. "That's an order from your future husband," he joked, though his eyes were hard as flint. "And humans are very bossy," the black commander hissed, its mandibles clicking in a mockery of laughter. It lunged. Kaelen didn't retreat. He threw the plasma cutter, not at the creature, but at the overhead coolant line. The beam sliced through the pipe, and a high-pressure spray of liquid nitrogen erupted, flash freezing the air between them. The Krell, cold-blooded and sensitive to extreme temperature shifts, recoiled in agony as their exoskeletons began to crack and shatter under the thermal shock. The room was suddenly filled with a thick, freezing fog, blinding everyone. Ding! The console let out a soft, melodic chime. 100%. Upload complete. Backup drive encrypted. Kaelen felt a hand grab a hand that was growing warmer, stronger. Seryth wasn't running. She was pulling him toward the ventilation shaft behind the vats. "You told me to say yes, Kaelen," she whispered through the fog, her voice regaining its melodic power. "And I do not leave what belongs to me." They scrambled into the narrow shaft just as the Black Commander smashed through the frozen mist, its roar shaking the very foundations of the Aethelgard. They were alive, but they were trapped in the guts of a dying station, with an army of shadows hunting them down. The ventilation shaft was a claustrophobic tunnel of groaning metal and recycled air that tasted like copper. Kaelen scrambled through the dark, his fingers scraping against the rivets, while Seryth followed close behind. Above them, the heavy, rhythmic thud-thud of Krell claws striking the exterior of the ducts sounded like a countdown to their execution. The station was dying. He could feel it in the shivering floor plates and the way the gravity generators flickered, momentarily making them feel weightless before slamming them back down. "Kaelen," Seryth whispered, her voice tight. "The primary life support in this sector is failing. The air. It is thinning." "I know," Kaelen wheezed. His lungs felt like they were being filled with cotton. Humans were hardy, but they weren't built for a vacuum. "There's a maintenance hatch 300 meters ahead. It leads directly to the hangar bay where the long-range scouts are docked. If we can reach it, we're out of here." Suddenly, a screeching sound tore through the metal above them. A serrated Krell blade punched through the ceiling of the vent, missing Kaelen's head by less than an inch. Sparks showered down, illuminating the terrifying reality. The swarm wasn't just following them, they were surrounding them. The Krell were intelligent enough to map the station's layout. They were corralling their prey toward a dead end. Kaelen kicked out a side grate and tumbled into a narrow corridor used for wire maintenance. He pulled Seryth after him just as the vent they had been in collapsed under the weight of a dozen scuttling shadows. "We're trapped," Seryth said, her amber eyes scanning the corridor. To their left, a heavy blast door had automatically sealed due to the hull breach. To their right, the corridor ended in a massive glass observation port overlooking the Xylos Nebula. There was no way out. Kaelen looked at the glass. Beyond it, the binary stars burned with a fierce, beautiful intensity, surrounded by the swirling teal gas of the nebula. It was a masterpiece of cosmic destruction. And then he saw it. A single tethered repair drone floating just outside the port, its mechanical arms folded in a standby loop. "Seryth," Kaelen said, a crazy, desperate idea forming in his mind. "How much do you trust me?" "With my soul resonance, Kaelen," she replied without hesitation, her hand finding his. "But why do you ask?" "Because," Kaelen said, raising his heavy plasma cutter and aiming it at the reinforced observation glass. "Humans are very good at improvising. And right now, the shortest distance between us and that hangar is a straight line through the void." Seryth's eyes widened. "Kaelen, the pressure differential, the cold. We will freeze before we reach the drone." "Not if we use the emergency thermal blankets from that locker." Kaelen pointed to a small red cabinet on the wall. "And not if we jump exactly when the station's rotation brings the hangar entrance into view. It's a 5-second jump. We can hold our breath for 5 seconds, can't we?" It was madness. It was suicide. It was the kind of plan only a human would conceive when backed into a corner. Seryth looked at the glass, then at the door where the Krell were already beginning to melt through the seals. She looked back at Kaelen, and for the first time, she laughed a sound like silver bells in a storm. "You are a very strange species, Kaelen Vance," she said, wrapping the thermal foil around both of them, pulling him into a tight, desperate embrace. "But I suppose I did say yes." Kaelen squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing the glowing lines on her palm. "On 3, he said, his finger tightening on the trigger of the plasma cutter. 1, the Krell burst through the door, a wave of black chitin and clicking mandibles. 2, Kaelen looked into Seryth's eyes, seeing a future he refused to let go of. 3, the plasma cutter flared, the glass shattered, and the universe screamed as it tried to pull them into the beautiful, deadly dark. The vacuum didn't scream. It whispered with a cold, absolute silence that threatened to pull the very soul out of Kaelen's body. The decompression was a violent tug, a physical hand shoving them through the jagged frame of the observation port. For a split second, Kaelen felt his skin prickle as the moisture began to evaporate, and the thermal foil snapped taut around them, vibrating like a live wire. He didn't look at the binary stars. He didn't look at the debris of the Aethelgard glittering like diamonds in the dark. He looked only at Seryth. Her eyes were closed, her face illuminated by the teal nebula, her grip on his hand so tight he could feel the pulse of her blood through his gloves. 5 seconds. That was the math. In the void, 5 seconds is an eternity when your lungs are begging for air you can't give them. Kaelen used the last of the momentum from the decompression to kick off a floating piece of hull plating, aiming their tangled bodies toward the maintenance drone. 1. The cold was an ice pick in his joints. 2. His vision began to tunnel, spotted with bursts of white light. 3. They slammed into the drone's mechanical arm. The impact knocked the remaining air from Kaelen's chest. He scrambled for a handhold, his fingers numb, hooking his arm through the drone's refueling tether. With his other hand, he hauled Seryth against the drone's chassis. She gasped, her chest heaving as she sucked in the tiny reserve of oxygen trapped within the foil seal. They were alive, but they were drifting. Kaelen fumbled for the drone's manual override panel. His movements were sluggish, his brain foggy from hypoxia. He punched in the emergency return code for the hangar bay. The drone's thrusters hissed, a small, beautiful blue flame pushing them back toward the gaping maw of Hangar 7. But as they turned, Kaelen saw the horror they had left behind. The Aethelgard was crawling. Thousands of Krell were swarming over the exterior like maggots on a carcass. And one of them, the Black Commander, was perched on the edge of the broken observation port, its multifaceted eyes locked onto the drifting drone. It didn't need a ship. It didn't need a suit. The Commander launched itself into the void, its powerful legs propelling it through the silence toward them. It moved with a terrifying rhythmic grace, using small puffs of caustic gas from its vents to steer. "Kaelen!" Seryth cried out, her voice faint through the vibration of the drone. "It is coming." Kaelen looked at the hangar. It was 50 meters away. The drone was moving too slow. The Krell Commander was closing the gap, its serrated blade arms ready to shred the foil in them into ribbons. "Seryth, the internal capacitor of this drone," Kaelen wheezed, pointing to a glowing power core near the thrusters. Can you resonance link it? Overload the discharge?" Seryth looked at the core, then at the approaching nightmare. "It will destroy the drone, Kaelen. We will be adrift without power. Better adrift than eaten," Kaelen gritted his teeth. "On my mark." The Commander was 5 meters away. Its mandibles opened, revealing rows of needle teeth. It reached out, its claw grazing the thermal foil. "Now!" Kaelen shouted. Seryth pressed her glowing palms against the drone's core. A blinding flash of violet energy erupted, traveling down the drone's arms and into the Krell Commander. The creature convulsed, its internal fluids boiling instantly in the vacuum. The shockwave of the discharge acted like a secondary thruster, hurling the drone and Kaelen and Seryth directly into the hangar's atmospheric shield. They tumbled through the shimmering blue curtain of the shield and slammed onto the hard, pressurized floor of Hangar 7. Gravity returned with a brutal thud. Oxygen rushed into their lungs. Kaelen rolled onto his back, coughing, laughing, and shaking all at once. Did we win?" he gasped. Seryth sat up, her iridescent hair wild, her amber eyes burning with a fire he had never seen before. She looked at the single long-range scout ship sitting on the launch pad, its engines already humming in standby. "Not yet," she said, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous purr. "But I believe the honeymoon is about to get very interesting." Behind them, the hangar's internal sensors began to chime. The Krell were already inside the vents. The hangar was a graveyard of abandoned cargo and flickering holograms. The screeching of metal overhead told Kaelen that the Krell were mere seconds from dropping through the ceiling panels. He scrambled to his feet, pulling Seryth toward the sleek silver hull of the Stellar Nomad, the long-range scout ship that was their only ticket out of this nightmare. "Get to the cockpit," Kaelen shouted over the roar of the station's dying core. "I have to release the docking clamps manually. The automated system is jammed." Seryth paused at the ramp, her amber eyes wide with a sudden sharp fear. "Kaelen, if you stay on the deck to release them, the mag locks will blow back. You won't make it inside before the hangar decompresses." Kaelen looked at the control lever 30 feet away, then at the scuttling shadows emerging from the vents above them. He flashed her that signature, reckless human grin, the one that had started this whole mess. "I'm a narrator, Seryth. I've read enough stories to know how the hero handles a climax. Now go, start the engines." As Seryth disappeared into the ship, Kaelen sprinted for the manual override. A Krell soldier dropped directly in his path, its mandibles clicking in anticipation. Kaelen didn't slow down. He slid across the oil-slicked floor, passing under the creature's guard, and slammed his shoulder into the heavy iron lever. With a groan of protesting metal, the clamps disengaged. "Kaelen, jump!" Seryth's voice echoed through the ship's external speakers. The hangar doors began to cycle open, the void of the Xylos Nebula hungrily pulling at everything not bolted down. Kaelen lunged for the closing ramp of the Stellar Nomad. His fingers caught the edge of the carbon fiber plating, just as the atmospheric shield flickered and died. The rush of air was deafening, a gale-force wind trying to hurl him into the abyss. A hand strung, shimmering, and worm clamped around his wrist. Seryth hauled him upward, her strength bolstered by the adrenaline of a woman who refused to lose her resonance. They tumbled into the airlock together, the heavy door hissing shut just as the Krell swarm reached the landing pad. Kaelen slumped against the bulkhead, his lungs burning, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked up to see Seryth hovering over him. The ship groaned as it cleared the Aethelgard, the thrusters kicking in with a powerful, steady hum that signaled safety. "You're insane," Seryth whispered, her forehead resting against his, completely, hopelessly human. "Is that a complaint?" Kaelen wheezed, reaching up to brush a strand of iridescent hair from her face. Seryth smiled a real, radiant Valari smile that made the stars outside look dull. "It's an observation. One that I intend to study for the next 50 solar cycles." She leaned in. And this time, there was no joke, no mission, and no radiation-soaked plants between them. It was a kiss that tasted of survival and a promise kept. As the Stellar Nomad jumped into warp, leaving the shattered remains of the station and the Krell behind, Kaelen realized that the universe was much bigger than he had ever imagined and far more romantic. He had joked about saying yes to an alien proposal for the sake of science. But as he looked at the woman beside him, he knew he'd say it again for the sake of his soul. That was quite the journey, wasn't it? If you enjoyed this tale of human grit and alien love, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow explorers. If you want more epic stories from the far reaches of the galaxy, don't forget to subscribe to HFY Soundscape and ring that notification bell. We've got plenty more legends to tell. Until next time, keep looking to the stars.